Military buildings don't always show up on maps. The secretive nature of the military often means that they conduct their operations in hidden outposts and fortifications, deep in forests, or sheltered on the sides of hills and mountains. That means you could stumble across a top-secret military bunker or base anytime you go walking in nature, and many people have. Here are just a few of the most unexpected military buildings and bunkers people have found in the wild. Secret bunkers can be found almost anywhere in the world, but they're especially prevalent in former Soviet states. Here's an example from Moldova. This imposing-looking bunker is known as Object 1180 and was once a command post for the Supreme Command of the USSR's Southwest Forces. While it's difficult to obtain the precise details of when and why the Soviet Union built its bunkers, it's generally thought that Object 1180 was built as a response to Germany's accession to NATO in May 1955. The crumbling ruins visible at ground level hide a much larger building beneath it, with around 12 floors stretching a whole 120 feet below the surface. It's so cold at the bottom that water remains frozen even during the warmest months of the summer. As for what happened inside these walls, who can say? The sheer amount of wires and cables suggests that at least part of the base was dedicated to top-secret communications, but that probably doesn't account for all of it. Any sensitive equipment would have been removed after the collapse of the Soviet Union, so there aren't enough clues here to paint the full picture. Sometimes, a well-made bunker might find a second lease of life, even when the military has no further purpose for it. We can see that with this enormous facility in the German town of Traben-Trarbach. It was built by the West German military during the 1970s, a time when the country was still partitioned into East and West. If war had broken out between the two sides, this is probably where some of the country's most important people would have ended up. The sprawling underground complex offers over 60,000 feet of floor space and is 5 stories deep. The walls were built to withstand a nuclear blast, so between that, the 1 million liters of drinking water, and the enormous food store that it had when it was new, this was somewhere that people could have hidden from the world for a very long time. The military eventually moved out of the bunker in 2012. Shortly after that, an eccentric Dutch cybercriminal, known only as Johan X, moved in. It's alleged that he set up an enormous criminal enterprise on the dark web using the bunker's facilities, carrying out as many as 250,000 illegal transactions until he was eventually caught in 2019. The base has now been sealed up, which is probably what the military should have done the moment they left. Urban explorers, or at least the responsible ones, don't tend to give away the precise locations of their discoveries. They want to ensure that their finds remain unspoiled and free of vandalism. Because of that, the only thing we know about the whereabouts of this next bunker is that it's somewhere in France. Based on what's inside it, it might have been almost totally untouched since the end of the Second World War. Some of the military vehicles inside it go back even further, to the First World War, so it might have been used in both conflicts. Vehicle storage was obviously part of the bunker's purpose, but the presence of multiple barracks and office space suggests that there were once plenty of people here to go with all the vehicles. There are a lot of mushrooms down here in the dark too. Perhaps too many mushrooms, in fact, so we can't rule out the possibility that someone briefly used the base to cultivate fungi after the military moved out. It seems to be abandoned now, which is a shame. Some of these vehicles should be in museums, not hiding underground. We're staying in France for a moment to take a look at another abandoned bunker. This time, we know exactly where it is. It's on Penbron Beach in La Tourballe, and it's a Type Regelbau 634 bunker. It's also known as a Habich Atlantikval bunker, So we know from the name that it was once part of Adolf Hitler's enormous Atlantic Wall. This heavily armored iron facility once contained 6 machine guns, the positions for which can still clearly be seen from the exterior. The holes could be closed with thick shutters for defensive purposes, and a small hole at the top of the structure provides enough space for a periscope to pop out and allow the soldiers inside the metal hut to take stock of their surroundings. Conditions on the inside would have been very cramped for the people manning the bunker. The walls are 6 feet thick, which doesn't leave much breathing room for the crew of 9 who would be required to remain inside for the bunker to be fully functional. After the war came to an end, the bunker was briefly used by a French electricity company, although we're not sure what they did with it. So much focus is given to the history of the Second World War in Europe that we sometimes forget that Japan also invaded China in those years. But they did, and the scars of that conflict still turn up from time to time. In 2015, 3 previously unknown Japanese military bunkers were discovered in the heart of downtown Beijing, China's capital city. The bunkers, strategically positioned within a few miles of Nanyuan Airport, evaded detection for so long because they were hidden beneath small residential buildings. Little is visible from ground level, other than steel doorways, but those doorways open to spiral staircases that lead several feet below ground. Curiously, the lowest levels of each of the 3 bunkers have been deliberately filled with rubble and blocked off, so we might never know what happened inside them. Local residents say that the nearby electrical components factory recently attempted to destroy them with explosives, but were unable to do so. They may have been built more than 70 years ago, but they were clearly made with the intention that they would survive the passage of time. Switzerland famously never got involved in the Second World War, but that doesn't mean the country's government never considered the possibility that someone might try to force them to. In anticipation of the possibility of an invasion by armies from either side, the Swiss built a series of bunkers all over the countryside. Many of them are still there today, often enjoying new lives as storage depots, data centers, or in some cases, even restaurants. If you were to walk past the artillery fortress known as Fuchsegg, you could easily believe it was a charming rural stable or barn, but it's actually a cleverly disguised machine gun bunker on the outskirts of Rialp. The facility was built in 1943 and remained in use by the military for 50 years. Another bunker on the St. Gothard mountain pass is now known as the Hotel La Claustra. We like to believe that the claustra part of its name refers to the fact that it must be quite claustrophobic once you get inside. The old Ruhental fortress on the Swiss-German border was built right at the start of the war in 1939 and stayed with the military until 1988. These days, it's a museum. These are only the bunkers that people know about. The chances are that there are dozens more that remain hidden. You'll find the NORAD North Bay Underground Complex in North Bay, Canada, where it's been standing since the 1960s. It's better known to the locals by its simple nickname, The Hole. During the Cold War, Canada and the United States of America worked together on contingency plans in the event of a nuclear attack from the Soviet Union. The Hole played a big part in those plans. The 2 countries created a network of supercomputers under the codename SAGE, which would allow them to coordinate their military responses to any attack. They were aware that the computers would be a key strategic target for any such attack, so they had to be stationed underground. The Hole was the perfect place to put them. In addition to the technology, the complex also had enough supplies to support 400 people sheltering inside it for a month. There was even a gym, a cafeteria, and a chaplain's office. The Hole remained active until the turn of the century, by which time the threat of nuclear war had significantly subsided. These days, it's mostly used for storage, although occasionally you'll see film crews here shooting movies like The Colony in 2012. In the almost 80 years that have passed since the Second World War, you'd like to think that the bunkers built as part of the war effort have ceased to be dangerous. Amazingly, that isn't always true. If you were to visit the Karelia region of Russia, you'd find a network of concrete bunkers spread between Lake Ladoga and the Gulf of Finland. They played a crucial role in turning back the Finnish army during the siege of Leningrad. In early 2017, a team of archaeologists explored some of the bunkers with specialist equipment and were amazed to find that some of them are still radioactive. In the worst examples, the amount of radiation detected was more than 1,000 times the standard background level, with more than 30,000 alpha particles per square centimeter per minute. The radiation comes from panels inside the bunkers coated with a form of radioactive fluorescent paint designed to make them visible in the dark. The bunkers had no electricity, so this was seen as an ideal solution. Worryingly, children sometimes come and play inside the bunkers, and homeless people use them to shelter from the elements. It's not known how many of them have become sick as a result of doing so. We have to go all the way to Australia to find our next military fortification, and it's the oldest one we've looked at so far. This is Signal Hill Battery in Watsons Bay, New South Wales, and it was built in 1892. Along with Shark Point Battery and the Ben Buckler Gun Battery, it was a key part of Australia's coastal defence fortifications at the turn of the 20th century. In its gun pit once sat a 9.2-inch Mark VI British Armstrong gun. The gun still exists, but these days it's on public display elsewhere in the country. The purpose of the Signal Hill Battery was to ward off the possibility of an invasion by allowing the Australian military to open fire on enemy vessels standing off the coast, but it rarely saw action. The last time the big gun was fired was 1933, after which it was briefly joined by a pair of 6-inch Mark 11 naval guns that remained in place until the end of the Second World War. Beneath the surface is a network of rooms and corridors, believed to include gunpowder magazines, mess rooms, and communication centers, but the entrance to them has been sealed and welded shut, so it's impossible to say for sure. A little further up the road in New South Wales, we find Fort Banks, which was built specifically for the Second World War for the express purpose of protecting the approach to Botany Bay. There was a golf course here before the war broke out, but the government requisitioned the land and built the Cape Banks Battery on it, adding the new facility to the Sydney Coastal Defence Network. A pair of breech-loading 9.2-inch gun emplacements stood above ground here during the war, and can be seen in old photographs, but they've long since been taken away. Unlike Signal Hill Battery, though, the underground parts of the battery are still open. Because of that, we know there's an underground plotting room, a hydraulic pump room, and an underground powder and shell magazine. All the rooms are connected with short, narrow tunnels with low ceilings. Conditions would have been cramped, but luxury generally isn't taken into account when you're building military fortifications during times of war. The fact that it's still possible to get inside has some drawbacks. It's great that the rooms are still standing, but they've been badly damaged by vandals and graffiti artists. In late 2017, Lisa Camps moved into her new home in Micheldean, Gloucestershire, England. As she tended to her new garden, an unmarked manhole cover caught her eye. There was nothing about the manhole cover in the documentation she'd received prior to buying the house, so she decided to open it up and find out what hides underneath it. To her immense surprise, it turned out to be the entrance to an air raid shelter. After enlisting the help of local historians, she believes she might have got to the bottom of the mystery. During the Second World War, the land her home is built on belonged to a company called BAF that made searchlights and anti-aircraft technology for the British military. The factory would likely have been a target for German bombing raids. So it made sense to have a large shelter on site both for the protection of workers and the protection of the products they manufactured. The company shut down in 1949, and Lisa's house was built the following year, after which it was lived in by the same family for decades until Lisa acquired it. If the previous owners knew the bunker was there, they never told their neighbors. Many of the old fortifications and bunkers we've seen in this video have found a second use after the military moved out. The Ostwall fortification in Poland has also found a new purpose, but not by humans. Instead, it's become home to thousands of bats. It's thought that there are around 37,000 bats living in the sheltered tunnels, which are on the outskirts of Miedzurich. This used to be German land, and Hitler personally ordered the construction of the fortifications just before the formal beginning of the Second World War, because he was concerned about a possible invasion from Poland. As we all know, that invasion eventually happened the other way round. There are more than 100 separate bunkers at the site, running on for more than 40 miles. At one point, there was a plan to station as many as 24,000 soldiers here, but the bunkers never reached full capacity and were mostly abandoned by the end of the war. Somewhat ironically, it was eventually handed over to the Polish army to serve as a firing range after it was captured by the Soviets. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and enjoy watching new videos on my channel. Thanks for watching, and see you soon!